Friedman. Welcome to the Trails Collective interview series. How are you?
I'm great, Ellie. Thanks for having me.
I feel like I have been listening to your voice a lot more recently now, and I am loving your podcast. I wish that I had known about this like a long time ago because you have a wonderful podcasting voice and it's so engaging. I love it.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, we've now that we have a little more time during the quarantine and all, we've stepped up the content machine. There's not a lot to talk about, but we're just inventing stuff. So,
Well, it's all been really great. So your podcast is called The Pain Cave.
yep.
And people can find it at your website, gunksrunner.com. I think it's /pain cave.
Yep.
And it's kind of a mixed bag of things. Like I listened to the one with J.E. Skeets from the No Dunks podcast. You guys are talking about basketball, and I was a baller back in high school, so it was taking me there. And then your ultra running like fantasy draft. I can't wait to listen to the men's one pretty soon. I just realized that just came out, and then you sold me with the ultra running books and movies, and it's just been the content has been really great. So why did you start a podcast, and when, I guess?
So the podcast has been going on for, I guess, like 2 years. And, I listen to a lot of podcasts. You mentioned J.E. Skeets, who hosts No Dunks, and that used to be a show called The Starters. And before that was The Basketball Jones. That was an early podcast that I got into. I listen to a lot of like sports and just random, pop culture and some political stuff, whatever. It's just, I started listening to those a few years ago. And, there's some really good running podcasts out there, and I just figured I'd try my hand at it, and I wanted to bring a little bit of a scientific background to it. There's a lot of kind of scientific concepts or misconceptions and stuff that people don't necessarily understand, so I thought it'd be fun to address some of those and, maybe bust some myths or stuff like that. And we did that for a while, and we still do that from time to time. I do have some, kind of science or academic-minded guests on, but most of the time it's just Phil and I basically BSing about beer and whatever. So, no, it's been really fun. I've gotten to talk to some really cool people. I've gotten some really accomplished ultra runners on the show. We've had Mike Wardian come on, talk about running across Israel. We've had Dylan Bowman on after he was on the podium at TDS 2 years ago. I had Kate Pillardi on after she won JFK. And then I've had some authors on, some great coaches and people who have written books on running. And we had Alex Hutchinson on after he wrote Endora last year, which if you haven't read that, that's a fantastic book. But
I've read it. It's great. And I actually listened to that. When the book came out, your podcast did come across my radar, and I did listen to that one. I like the podcast in the having you do it, just because with your science background, it sort of can take the sciencey science and make it approachable for the lay person. And also I'm a running nerd, and so I like to learn all the science about what I'm doing, even if like in that like 800 meter repeat I'm not thinking about like lactate threshold or whatever, but I understand like conceptually why those things are important.
Right.
And you have a very good way of just conveying these ideas that makes it approachable, and also like now I understand why I hurt so bad.
Well, thank you. That's kind of what I was envisioning when we started out. I work with athletes sometimes when I'm doing physiology stuff and testing people in the lab and kind of translating that into, like you said, kind of more for a lay person. And I like doing that. I like trying to kind of simplify, concepts that are maybe a little bit more complex and, just try and communicate them better. So that's what we did when we started, and yeah, we try to keep doing that sort of stuff, and like I said, just branching out into some different areas. And now that there's not a lot of news or anything to talk about, we're just trying to really have fun with it.
So when you're personally running, do you think about these concepts? Like say you're going to the track and you're like, I'm going to do like a couple of K repeats or something. Do you think about like what you're doing scientifically when you're doing it? Or is it more of like, I know I need to do this and I'm just gonna like think about whatever I need to think about to get through it?
Yeah, not so much in the moment necessarily. It's definitely, in my mind when I'm putting together a training plan for, myself or for an athlete that I'm coaching or something like that. It's, whether or not they've been tested in a lab or not, it's helpful to, have a general idea of what kind of paces or intensities they need to run for to get different benefits out of different workouts, and then just knowing how to utilize these different pieces of information and build a plan together. Super helpful. The stuff that I think helps me kind of in the moment the most is, a lot of the, like what I was talking about with Alex and a lot of people that I've had on talking about kind of the mental side of training and performance, because that I think is something that you can kind of work on in real time. Like if you're, like you said, if you're at the track and you're trying to dig deep on an interval or something like that, it's helpful to be able to reach back and know that when you're really hurting, you're just like, well, it's really just my brain trying to tell myself to slow down. And if I can fool my brain, or if I can override my brain, and push a little bit harder, I can get a little bit more out of this. And so that's kind of where I think it helps me the most in terms of the actual nuts and bolts when you're, what are you thinking about, or how are you applying it to your day-to-day running? Trying to remember that it's all kind of it's all a trick of your mind, and if you can master that, then who knows what you can really do.
Yeah, I just actually read something about, so David Ritzenheim just retired. I don't know if you know that.
I saw that. Yeah.
And he said something, and he's being quoted, and like a lot of stories are coming out. Well, one thing stuck with me where he was talking to some reporter, and he said, "There's only been a couple times in my life where I really was like, I could die right now." And it was in like the 2003 battle between him and Ryan Hall. And he, like, on finishing, he was like, I might die. And that's crazy that you can overcome so much like mental telling yourself to stop, like your heart beating out of your chest and like your leg broken or whatever. Like he was like, I thought I might die, but he didn't stop. And that's incredible to me.
He was one of my all-time favorites. Like that was kind of my era of really following, now I'm really obviously into ultras and trail and stuff, but in terms of following like track and road and cross and that sort of thing, that was like when I was really in the thick of like being a fan. And he was my guy. He was so freaking tough. He was unbelievably tough. And I mean, super talented too, for sure. But it was kind of like him and Hall and Webb were kind of like the big three at the time. And he probably had the least talent, like, not that he wasn't incredibly talented. Ritz was an amazingly talented guy, but he got more out of what he had than I think either of the other guys did. I mean, they all three had amazing careers, but he was so strong, but so mentally tough. He was one of my favorite cross country runners ever. So strong.
And in his later career, like you don't hear much about like, oh, they are specialized. They're like a half marathon guy. But he was like a half marathon guy. You don't really hear that much because the half marathon is so fucking hard, but it's also like the ugly stepsister to the marathon, or it's not as fast as the 5K. It's
Right.
kind of just like that, like distance for like soccer moms, but he was a half marathon guy. And that's, considering that's my hardest distance, I completely respect Ritzenheim, like serious.
If you think about it, it's basically like cross country. Like half marathon is like a long cross country race. Like it's basically the same energy system. It's the same kind of stress. And he was, I mean, if you had to pick one thing that you would want to take Ritz in, if you were going to do a fantasy draft like we were doing, I'd take him in cross country. He was as good as he was on the track in the 10K or whatever, and he was a very solid marathoner. He was a cross country runner at heart. So, and that's like a very similar crossover to the half. Like you said, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle of like the marathon or, the track, which is, where all the big money is and stuff. But I mean, if cross country was an Olympic sport, he would have been a multi-time Olympian. And it would be interesting if it was an Olympic sport and cross country got more kind of money and publicity and that sort of thing. What would you see guys do in that and then in the half marathon? Because like I said, it's a lot of crossover right there.
I wonder if he could stay healthy. I wonder, because cross country runners, they also do pretty good with like trail and mountain stuff. So who knows? Sure. He might second life.
Yeah. No, you look at Max King got his, he's, obviously one of the stars of the ultra and trail scene. But in addition to being a world-class steeplechaser, he made the U.S. cross team like 4 or 5 times. He was, I feel like steeplechasers and cross-country runners can kind of do anything.
Yeah, it's true. This very, They're very multifaceted, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yes.
So speaking of you mentioned that 2003 was like your kind of your time to do like road and track and things like that. So why don't we start where you started running? Because I know that your first ultra was in 2010, which you won. We'll go to that later. But let's go. It was I have it. It's running with the devil 6 hour. You
Oh,
won.
no, that's not me. That's not me. You got the wrong one, but we'll go. That's fine.
Okay. So how many Jay Freemans are there?
There's two of us. I'm the
Oh my
better looking
God.
one.
Well, that's okay. Now you've educated me. And why don't we start where you started?
So as a runner, I've been, since I was 13, I guess, with just a few breaks here and there. But I ran all through high school and college, and um, and in medical school, I was still, training as best I could, and ran marathons then. And I moved into ultras when I was. I was probably in my early 30s. I think it was I think it was oh 06 or oh 07 was my first ultra. It was actually a race called Mountain Mist in outside Birmingham. A really cool trail race that it's pretty famous regionally down in the southeast. And there are a bunch of even West Coast guys have come out. Dave Riddle, who from Ohio, has won it a whole bunch of times. But before that, actually the first year I was there, Dave Mackey was there, and a lot of good Southeast runners have run it. So that was my introduction to ultra running. It was pretty funny. I'd never run obviously over a marathon before, and I hadn't done a ton on trails. I had done a little bit, but I started out real slow, and I was feeling really good, and I kind of moved up, and I don't remember what place I was, somewhere in the like the 8 to 12 range or something like that. And we came to the second to last aid station, and it was the 25-mile mark. So I pulled into the aid station, and I said, 25 miles. They said, yep, 10K to go. It'll take you about an hour. And I said, now I've never run a 10K in an hour in my life. I'm going to be done in like 35 minutes, And of course, an hour and 10 minutes later, I'm just like, ah. But yeah, that was my introduction to ultra running.
So you seem to, just listening through your podcast, you seem to be extremely well versed in the track and field world, at least in the training world. Like with your discussion with Joe about all the books and the training systems. So how do you maintain like that level of knowledge now with what you're doing? And then do you coach track and field athletes, or do you coach road runners? How do you keep all of that going in your brain?
Sure. So, yeah, a lot of it's just being grounded in like just a long history of doing that. I was a track and a road runner for long before I was on the trails for, a good 15 plus years. So, making my own training plans for a while I was training for the marathon and that sort of thing. And I stay up on things by reading, and I've, all those books that we were talking about, I still go back and check, Daniels and Noakes and all that sort of stuff from time to time, just because, it's good to be reminded of concepts and kind of remember the basics. And yes, I do still coach, not so many, I don't really have any track athletes right now, but I do still coach road runners and marathoners. I've got a couple people trying to qualify for Boston. So yeah, it's still a lot of, building in track work and kind of tempo and marathon pace running on the road and that sort of stuff, trying to get people ready for the stress of trying to, pound out those, 26 miles on pavement. It's not easy.
So take me back to when you were training seriously for the road. What kind of training were you doing? When was like peak road Jay?
Peak road Jay was probably, after medical school and residency. Residency was hard. I didn't get a ton of training in. So it was the early few years my first few years out of residency, when we, either didn't have kids or the kids were really young. That was probably kind of the mid aughts or so. So what was I doing then? I was probably running. So, I actually, when I was in medical school, I used to run a lot. Like I had stretches of 115 to 130 mile weeks for months at a time. And I had some good races, but a lot of it was just stress on top of stress on top of stress. And I was lucky in that I didn't get injured, but I was kind of burnt out a lot. Once I got out of residency and had a little bit more kind of balance in life and work and everything else, it got a little bit better. But yeah, I probably trained, on average, like 85 to 100 miles a week at kind of peak when I was building up for stuff with, usually 2 workouts plus a long run. Workouts were pretty standard. Mile repeats or 800 repeats on the track, and, tempo runs 30, 35, 40 minutes, or like a marathon pace run, like, trying to lock into that pace for 10, 12, 14 miles or something like that. Nothing groundbreaking or anything. It was pretty standard.
And where were you at this point, like locationally?
So medical school and residency, I was in Philadelphia. So I was doing a lot of running on the roads, obviously there. And then actually during residency, I lived still within city limits, but it was kind of on the border. And there was a big park there called Wissahickon Park, which had a lot of trails. So I did some trails training in there. And then after that, we were up here in New Paltz, which is where I live now. So we have tons of trails and carriage roads here. So I'm rarely on the roads, although, at the time when I was still trying to train for the marathon, a lot of the kind of tempo work was still road-based.
So what'd you PR in the marathon in?
2:38.
Oh, nice. Solid.
Yeah, it was fine.
I mean, it's nothing to sneeze at. So when did you decide to sort of make the transition to the trails?
So it kind of grew gradually out of that first race at Mountain Mist. And I still was doing a little bit of road running then, but once I kind of ran that race, and I think my second ultra was the Finger Lakes 50K, which is kind of not far from you guys, I guess.
I know. So tomorrow, I'm signed up for it. Tomorrow we find out if it's still going to happen, because the race director, Alex, I asked her a little bit ago, I was like, is this still happening? Because I'm still registered for it on Ultra Sign Up. And she's like, we have the meeting on Wednesday, so they will see if it's still going to happen.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fun race. So
I've gone and I've been there a bunch of times. Like I slop through the mud like everybody, and I volunteer, and but I've never ran it.
So that was, so like 06, 07 was when I kind of started getting into that sort of stuff. And there's a big trail scene around here. There's, you mentioned you had talked to Ben Nephew recently, who's won the Escarpment Trail Run probably a dozen times, which is right near here. And that's kind of formed the basis for a pretty big trail scene over the last several years. So I kind of fell into that and started training with, a lot of ultra guys and a lot of trail runners. And didn't really look back since then.
That's kind of how I feel about why I'm still on the roads training right now. So I'm like, well, you have training partners and they make it more fun. Yeah, exactly. So here we are.
Exactly. Yeah. And for the first few years that I was here, I was training with a lot of triathletes. There's a big triathlon scene around here. So it was easy to find somebody to do a road run or a track workout with. And, even a lot of our trails around here are kind of carriage roads, like crushed gravel, rail trail type stuff, but up in the mountains. So, it's still almost like a road running experience. So the triathletes will do a lot of that stuff. But then, even a couple of the tri guys were big trail runners, or were super into that kind of scene. And it made the transition a little easier.
So is this at the period of time when you met Laura? You guys seem to be pretty good friends, and I enjoyed your banter on the podcast. I definitely enjoyed your and her strategy to pick people rather than Phil's. I started calling him the Astros of ultra running. But so is that how you met Laura?
Yeah, so Laura moved down here. I had been here, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, probably maybe a little bit more. And there was a great race, Laura's from Pennsylvania originally. There's a great race outside the Reading area that's called the Mount Penn Mud Fest, where my friends and a couple of my tri friends would go down. We went down 4 or 5 years in a row to run it. It was really, really fun, put on by the Pretzel City Sports guys. And then one year, the first year that Laura was living here in New Paltz, she went down with us, and I hadn't met her before that. But we went down. Actually, now I'm thinking, I think we probably just met her down there, but we knew she was going to be there. And she crushed me. I think she was like third overall. It was like, she just dominated everybody. And afterwards I was just like, oh God, we got to start running together because you just destroyed me. And yeah, she knew that race and those guys from living in that area for a long time. She kind of grew up around there. So yeah, so she was here for several years and we became really good friends and training partners. And she was somebody who I could always count on. Like if I needed to get a track workout in, she was the one who I would call. And we, I don't get up at 6 o'clock in the morning for pretty much anything, but that was the one thing that we would get up for or that I would get up for was going to the track and banging out some intervals. Cause yeah, otherwise I don't do that.
There is just something to be said about like the shared suffering on the track. Like like workouts on the track are still my favorite. I'm so sad that one, they're closed, and two, they're tearing up the IHS track and they're gonna like redo it. So right now it's just a mud pit, and I'm just so sad when I go by. I'm just like, but that's all right. That's why we have the waterfront trail, I guess. It's fine. Not mad. Actually, you want to know a funny story where I met Laura is a race as well, but I didn't know anyone, including her, but I decided to just get into a van with a bunch of other people and do a Ragnar relay. And that is how I met Laura.
Was that with the vegan
the Straw Charts team? Yeah, so long ago, but it was so fun. And now it's just amazing, like the connections you can make, because she's had a big influence on me too. It's so she's a wonderful person.
She's great. Yeah, so we've shared a lot of miles together. She actually paced me during my first 100 at Rocky Raccoon, and actually we wound up walking for like 4 hours together. But
I think she did that with Jason Mintz too at Western States.
At Western States, yeah.
So for my first 100, I'm like, Laura, I need a walking buddy.
Exactly. I feel bad for her because I don't know that anyone's ever actually had a good performance when she's been pacing through no fault of her own. It's just like, you pick her up and it's all of a sudden it just goes to shit. But she's the best. And yeah, we've had a lot of fun on the podcast. You listen to the men's one. Phil got a lot better. He started behaving, played by the rules. He had a lot of luck with where the events fell out, but he definitely, I won the women's team. I'm not going to hear any arguments to the contrary, but I will admit his men's team crushed us. It was Rich and I, and Phil destroyed us. So.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I haven't seen Rich in a while either. I think the last time I saw him was when my friend Amelia and I decided to do that backyard quarantine ultra to raise money for Ian's store. And on like our second to last loop, we just had to get off this one loop that we had been doing. So we went downtown. We ended up seeing him and Jude, their child, and then Pete Kressock and his new kids. And it was great. It was a good decision. But yeah, I miss Rich too. He's got such an interesting schedule now with his child. So I haven't ran with him in like a super long time, but definitely a good training buddy when he was getting pretty fit last year.
Yeah. No, he's crazy talented. And it's just a question for him of like just fitting everything in, like family and work and everything else, and staying motivated and staying healthy. But when he's on, he's tough. He's really, really strong.
So you're a physician, an emergency room physician, yes?
Yep.
So, and you also, like we talked about, you're very driven by science, but you also understand the practical application of that. There are a lot of different training modalities, and even in my training, I steal a plan from my training partners. That's just how it works for me, and I'll modify it if I need to. But how do you decide like which style of training works for each athlete? And then because there are like 2 workouts in a long run, or like the NAS elite ladies, they do a lot of workouts within their long run, but for me, at least in the last cycle, that didn't work at all. I almost got injured twice. So how do you know which cycle to which training modality to start someone with, and then like how do you know when to change it?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I mean it's not a really clean answer. The answer is it's a lot of trial and error. You start out like I like to just have a long conversation with somebody. What's worked before, what hasn't worked before, when have you run into trouble, that sort of thing, just so you get a general sense of what they have experience with or where some problem areas might lie. But yeah, it is a lot of trial and error. I do, right now, from my own running, I've been working with David Roche as my coach. And so I've been adopting a lot of his principles, which like you talk about it's a lot of like combining 2 workouts into one so that your total stress days are lower, but you're still getting the same benefits. So, it might be like, he's really big on like short intervals and strides and that sort of thing. So it might be like you have a bunch of like 1 or 2 minute intervals, like 10 by 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and then like 6 by 30-second hills or something. So you're kind of getting the stress of 2 similar but different systems in the same day. And then, your other days, you're not sacrificing a recovery day, but you're still getting like an extra added bonus stress. Or, like you said, mixing in a workout in your long run. So either a progression run to finish a long run, which I really like, or Dave does a lot of like 20 or 30 minute moderately hard segments in the middle of a long run or something like that, or like a long uphill climb where you're focused on a certain, aspect of that during a long run. So it's the kind of thing where you're, that way you might only have like 2 quote unquote hard days in a week, but you're still getting the benefit of hitting a bunch of different systems. So, for some people that really works. I've responded well to that, and I've tried that with some of my athletes, and a lot of them like it, and some of them are I haven't really run into people necessarily getting injured, but for some people it's too much. So it is playing around a lot. It's helpful if somebody does have, an exercise, a cardiopulmonary exercise test that they've had done recently, because then you can look and see, like, so if I can, get a sense of, what's your VO2 max, what's your lactate threshold, what's your running economy? And then you can look at those things and say, well, all right, your VO2 max is really good, but maybe your economy is not so good. Maybe that's what's limiting you. So maybe we can work on doing that by building in like some longer steady state runs, or just increasing your mileage without, really sacrificing recovery. Or if maybe you're really economical, but your VO2 max isn't as high as your threshold, or your threshold isn't as high, well, then we mix in, more intervals, or we mix in more lactate threshold runs or something like that. So it's good to have that information sometimes, because you can see where imbalances are. But a lot of times you don't have that information, and, I like to have it, but I don't necessarily need it. So a lot of times it's just seeing what people respond to, and kind of just playing around, making sure you're, building in a certain amount of work and a certain amount of stress, and trying to, hit these different systems at different times in the progression. But, it's a lot of just kind of seeing what people respond to and what they like.
I really like David Roach as a coach. He's not my coach. I don't have one, but I find that he's really good for, or just trends that I've noticed is like injury prone or aging runners. Mm-hmm. Others too as well. But I mean, I just think like with those 2 groups, he's just really good, because his strategy, like what you just said, is a lot more forgiving on the body as well, rather than like shorter intervals, but mm-hmm. the amount of work might be the same. Whereas like this morning, my workout was like 3 by 2 miles, which was really hard, right. But in my other lives, I've been more injury prone. So I might do like 800s instead and take like more of a rest, just because like that's where my body's at. And I think that right. You as a coach obviously know, and like David has it figured out, that you've got to like start where the athlete is and not where they want to be or they think they are, or all that kind of thing. I mean, it's like running 120 miles or like doing like a lot of like what Lydiard threshold training and stuff says is great, but that if that's not your body, then it's not going to work for you.
Right. And like you said, Dave, I agree 100%. And Dave is great with older athletes like myself, because, we do tend to kind of get into a rut sometimes of, where you've been doing this for a long time, and, sometimes you forget what works, or sometimes you just fall into this rut of, I'm just going to run more, and I'm going to run more. And you can forget what actually keeps you successful. So he focuses a ton on running economy, and he likes to build running economy. And I shouldn't just say him, Megan as well, his wife, who's also, I think Megan coaches Dave and Dave coaches Megan, and they're both fantastic coaches. But their focus is a lot on building economy through speed. And, as we get older, and especially if we've got years of training behind us, speed is the thing that we're going to start to lose before we start losing like muscular endurance and that sort of thing. So, at this point where I've been doing this for 25, 30 years. And, I've put in, 3,500 to 4,500 miles a year for the last 15 years or so. I probably don't need to still be stacking 100, 115-mile weeks. But what I do need to do is focus on maintaining those neuromuscular connections, maintaining that speed so that, my sense of economy, my work rate at a sub-maximal intensity is low, because that's what you need for longer stuff. As we get into the ultra stuff, you think, I can run 9-minute pace for as long as I want. It's 9-minute pace or whatever. But unless you're still, making sure that the body knows how to run at 6-minute pace for short periods of time, 9-minute pace isn't going to feel like 9-minute pace forever. So it's kind of making sure that you're still emphasizing to your system that it's okay to run fast is what makes the slower paces feel easier. And so that's what I think we tend to lose that a little bit if we just focus on mileage. And as we get older, we're just going to start to lose that naturally. So a lot of Dave's training is kind of fighting against that.
I think also, like, for runners that didn't have that kind of training, like I didn't grow up running, so I've had to teach myself how to run fast. And it's hard to teach yourself how to sprint. Like,
Yes.
You don't just do it. It's been very, like, that's why, like, sometimes my training partners, they will like slough off the strides at the end of or like uphill sprints at the end of easy runs. And I do them every time because I'm like, I don't know how to sprint. This is how I'm teaching myself. So I'm just going to run up these hills for like just 6 times at the end of an easy run. And that's one thing that I think, even if I do, considering there are no races, I don't know, if I start to train for ultra distance races to compete, I definitely think that keeping a speed, 1 or 2 speed days in the week, not only like is it good because it'll like help me get faster or remain fast, but also it just like breaks it up more. Like I feel less beaten down running like 70 to 80 miles a week with 2 hard speed days than I do like running all easy mileage. It's very strange, but I mean, I'm sure you know the science, but I'm just going to I know what my body's telling me. So it's fine.
No, for sure. 100%. And if you listen to interviews with, any of the top men and women in the sport, that's one thing that you'll see over and over is just this emphasis on, maintaining speed and still doing hard work, hill work, sprints, strides, that sort of thing. Everyone's doing that because it's the only way that you can really compete. And like you say, you get stale, you get kind of beaten down without that sort of thing. And you make a good point, is that not everyone kind of comes up with this, running background of, knowing how to sprint or knowing, these hard workouts. And I think when people get into the sport later in life, you have this tendency just to kind of run, just to build mileage and to run the one pace all the time. And that's, it'll get you a lot of benefit early on. And then it's going to lead to plateaus. And unless you can kind of break that up, it's hard to really improve beyond you've got a ceiling to it. That's what I tell people. Like one of the first things when I'm starting with people who haven't really worked with a coach before is, I'm like, 95% of the time you're doing your easy runs too fast and your fast runs too easy. Right. And it's just, everything's in like this really narrow band. I just had this conversation with somebody 2 days ago who was asking about training for their first 50 miler. And they're like, all right, I'm running, 30 miles a week at, 8:30 pace. I'm just like, well, what else? And that's what I'm doing. I'm doing that and I'm cycling. I'm like, all right, well, if you're doing 30 miles a week at 8-minute pace or 8:30 pace, then what you really should be doing is 20 to 25 miles a week at 10-minute pace and 5 to 10 miles a week at something different. Because, and that's when you go back through, it doesn't matter, ultra running, trail running, track, road, anything. You look at the top people in the sport, they're running their hard runs harder than you are, and they're running their easy runs easier than you are. And that's the trick.
And sometimes that means your easy run might be boring, and just got to do it.
Yeah. No, I mean, right. Sometimes, right. Stumbling through a 9:30 or a 10-minute mile, it sucks, but it's fine. Once you learn to embrace it, it's fine. And then you can run with anybody, you can run with, your non-running spouse or your 15-year-old kid or whatever. Anyone can do that.
Well, that's one thing that my training partner Bailey and I have talked about, because like we called them Flat Fridays because we'd run on do you know what the Black Diamond Trail is in Ithaca? that
No,
like
it wasn't.
it's like, oh god, it's not even a trail, it's like a rail trail, it's so flat, like it's boring, it's an out and back, it's so
Mhm.
boring. And we do it on Friday because we want something less impact and flat-ish, so that on Saturday we can knock our workout out of the park. Like that's the point of it.
Sure.
But it's the most boring thing ever. And the only way we'd get through it is if we could run it together. But of course now we can't really run together. So every Friday, like, because we'll do them at different times now. I'll be like, Bailey, I don't know how many more of these I can do without you, because this is just the most boring thing. But I'm telling myself that I'm saving myself for the workout on Saturday. So
Yeah, exactly.
whatever. And then I listen to your podcast and it's fine. It gets it through. It's only a 65-minute run, so it's fine.
65 minutes. That's about how long we usually go. So
Yeah. So I guess then if I looked at the wrong like ultra sign up, so you didn't run Leadville?
no, I ran Leadville, but he did
Okay.
too. So it's true. So if you're on Ultra Sign Up, if you scroll down to the bottom, it's me. So there, it's fine. It's the same name, same spelling. He's about 5 years younger than me, or so, and we live about 45 miles apart. Like I could drive to his house.
Yeah, it's because
pretty easily.
like all the races were like races on this. I was just like, oh great, Jay. Oh wow, okay. So
Yeah,
you did run Leadville. How many times?
just one. So he's running a few, but
Okay.
but
Did you run it in 2018?
yeah. So did he though.
Okay. All right. Whatever.
I know. Yeah, so we both ran it in 2018. I saw him there. We hung out a little bit. So yeah, that was my, I don't know, third or fourth 100, I guess.
Okay. So what other hundreds have you done?
I've done Rocky Raccoon twice. I've done.
Is that the flat one, or is that Run Rabbit Run?
No, Rocky's pretty flat. It's not as flat as people say it is. It's,
Well, it's
people.
100 miles.
What's that?
It's 100 miles.
Yeah, no, I mean, people talk about it like it's like a rail trail. It's not. It's got some rolling. It's probably 8,000 feet of climb, 6 to 8,000. It's probably about 8,000 feet of climb. It's got some routes and a little bit of single tracky, or a good bit of single track. It's not super technical. It's certainly not East Coast Northeast technical or anything like that. But it's not like a track meet like some people say it is. So I've run that a couple times. Leadville. I got two other 100-mile efforts. One was a 24-hour at North Coast, which is the national championships a couple years ago, for 24 hours, and I did a backyard ultra, which you had your recent experience with. I did a backyard ultra last year down here, so that was over 100 miles also.
So you haven't run Western States?
Nope, not for lack of trying. I've been out there.
I was ask about your experience, because you said in the podcast like you were doing medical for Western States. So tell me about that.
That was actually my first exposure to ultra running, or my first-hand exposure to ultra running. The story starts when in 2004, when I was finishing up my residency. I did a 1-month elective in Yosemite Valley. They have a medical clinic there for visitors to the park and residents and employees and that sort of stuff. So I was working in the medical clinic and doing like search and rescue, and just running around Yosemite was amazing. But one of the supervising docs in the medical clinic was a guy named Gary Toll, who is an ultra runner and on the board of Western States. And I'd heard about Western States and I'd probably read some articles in Runner's World or something like that. But I'd never, been to an ultra or really seen anything about it. I think at that point I'd probably read Dean Karnatzis's book, Ultra Marathon Man, and kind of just had this conception of just like a bunch of weird people, running through the woods and that sort of thing. But when he found out I was a runner, Gary Toll, he kind of just kept talking it up and convinced me to come out the next year to volunteer and do medical care at Western State. So I was at Michigan Bluff, which is the 55-mile mark, one of the main aid stations on the course. I was there for about 10 hours, and then I was at the finish overnight. So it was 2005, so that was Scott Jurick's last year there. So I got to see him come through, and then I just got to the finish in time to see him finish. And then it was just a amazing experience. And I was like blown away by just so many people and what you see. A trail 100 is, when you're seeing people who are out there for 25, 28, 30 hours and just so much struggle and drama and everything else. And so many awesome athletic performances. I mean, you're at Western States, you're obviously seeing the cream of the crop in terms of our sport. So it was just such a spectacle. I was just in love with it right away. And, I ran my first 50K the next year.
That's really cool. I bet that was really special.
It was great. It was really great. And I love Western States. I've been back twice now to pace and crew. So once for Glenn Redpath and once for Brian Ostrike in 2017. And, or 18. Now I don't remember. It was 18. It was right before I was in Leadville. And 4-time loser in the lottery now. So we'll, keep our fingers crossed for, hopefully I get into it before I turn 50.
So I guess I don't know which ultra sign up is this, right? So did you not race at all last year or only race like once in 2019?
No, I ran a few races in 2019. I don't know how much is on ultra sign up. Trying to think of what I raced. I guess my biggest race last year, my two biggest races were Rock the Ridge, which is our local 50 mile here in New Paltz in the Shawangunk Mountains, which I was supposed to be there last weekend, but of course got postponed. Hopefully, it's got a date in September now, so we'll see. And the other one was in June. I ran the Mountain Lakes Backyard Ultra, which was one of the qualifiers for the Biggs Backyard. So I was trying to get a golden ticket into the Biggs Backyard and run down there. But it was top. Just the winner got to go. I came in second, so unfortunately didn't make it down to Biggs. So. And I did a couple other smaller. I did the 50 mile at Brazos Bend in December, and Phil was out there running the 100, so I got to run the 50 and then crew him and then pace him for the last lap of his 100, and a couple of other small races as well that I can't remember off the top of my head.
How do you like the backyard format? Like when Amelia and I did it, we thought it was great. Like we had a hard stop at 40 miles because we didn't want to like injure ourselves or do anything silly. But I was like, this is so approachable. I mean, I feel like it's also a good strategy for somebody who wants to run their first 50K or something. I'm like, this is so approachable.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's a great introduction. Just like a time, a timed race, if you're, just, dipping your toe into the ultra distances, like a 6 hour or a 12 hour is just a great introduction because, everything's pretty well controlled. You're going to be on either a track or a loop or something like that. You don't have to carry a lot. You know exactly, when you'll be getting aid and everything else. And, you're racing the clock. It's not like a distance kind of thing. You just go until you want to stop, basically, in a time race. Same thing in a backyard. And I love the backyard format. It's like the great equalizer, like anyone can be good at it. It certainly helps to be fast, but you don't need to be fast. You don't even really need to be much of a runner. You just need to be able to stay awake, eat a lot, and just convince yourself to keep going, and you can be successful. It's such a mind game. It's it's a total like internal battle, like nothing I've ever dealt with in any other 100 or anything like that. It's, convincing yourself to stand up and walk back into the corral and start another one. And the problem is, I said this, I've said this a bunch of times since I did it. You get to this point as you well know, in any kind of long event where, you start to question yourself and you're just like, why am I doing this? I'm going to stop. And, most of the time we don't stop, but, I think unless you're very, very lucky in any like 50 or 100 mile race, you're going to get to a point where you want to quit. And usually if you can, just recognize what's going on and that your brain is telling you something stupid and you can just move through it, then everything generally gets better, right? And part of the reason it gets better is you keep moving and you say, all right, well, now I'm a little bit closer and I can kind of, get into your head that, you're making your way, even if you're going very slowly, you're very slowly making your way towards the finish. And eventually things turn around and you start to see, you can sense the finish coming a little closer and a little closer and things get better. And you get through that one period and, oftentimes it just passes and it's over. And in the backyard, you have to go through this, but it never gets better because you never get any closer is the problem, So you hit this point and the format is, it gives you a few minutes to think about it, right? Depending on however fast you get back to the start, you might have 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes to sit and think, do I really want to stand up and do this again? I really just want to stop. And then, yeah, you go into your ultra mode and you fight through it and you get back up and you start running again and you do another lap and you get back to the finish and you're no closer than you were an hour ago. You're just right back in the same position, having to go through this entire thing over again in your mind of, do I want to quit? Do I want to keep going? But every time you do it, you're not any closer to the finish. All you're doing is making yourself run more every time. It's just such a total, it messes with your mind so much. It's unbelievable. It's great.
Yeah, that sounds like sometimes the psychological stuff is just like the best part.
Yeah.
Like, how am I going to defeat my own mind?
Yeah, exactly.
So one thing I wanted to touch on, because I feel like you might have opinions about this, are golden ticket races on the East Coast. If you could pick a couple golden ticket races on the East Coast, not the Southeast, they're true. What would you pick?
It's a very timely topic, Ellie.
Yes, I know.
So are we where, are you saying given like ideal conditions, or are we sticking by like the parameters that are set? So it has to be 100K or more, and it has to be in the first half of the year.
Why don't we do a couple of those and then just like ideal ones, because then I'm going to tell you about my next idea.
Okay. So the problem is, especially in the Northeast, I mean, throughout the East Coast, but particularly the Northeast, the big problem is in the first half of the year, and really it's got to be before that, because you need to give people a period of time to recover between the golden ticket race in Western states. You're really talking about the first 4.5 to maybe 5 months of the year of a golden ticket race, unless you wanted to start it before the calendar year. So, because the weather in the Northeast is unpredictable and cold, there's not a lot of great options to choose from within that time frame. One that doesn't really qualify, but I'm hoping will, is Rock the Ridge, which we're talking about, which is a 50 mile, so it doesn't hit the threshold. But I've been working for a little while now with the organizers to see if they would be amenable to moving it up to 100K. If it did become 100K, then it would automatically be a Western States qualifier, and I think would be a perfect opportunity for a golden ticket race, because it's in early May, so it's plenty of time for recovery. But it's the weather is still going to be doable here, so where we probably don't have to deal with snow and that sort of thing. They're very runnable trails. It's easy travel. There's plenty of lodging, and it's a beautiful, beautiful course. And it's a capped field, but not capped very much. I mean, we can accommodate like 600-700 runners. So it would be really a perfect one. In terms of races that already exist, in the first half of the year, like I said, there's not much in the 100K range, depending on when UROC has their race. I mean, sometimes they're in the kind of April-May range. That date bounces around a lot, but that's a well-established race. The course is supposed to be pretty nice. I've never been down to those trails, but it's in the area where a lot of, I think, David Horton's races are, and some of those trails. So that would be a good one. I mean, one of my all-time favorite races, also not 100K, but if you could do a shorter, I mean, not every golden ticket race is 100K. I mean, Lake Sonoma's not. So
it's not on it anymore.
Well, not for next year, but we'll see. I mean, I'm not so sure what's permanent and what's not in this whole coronavirus situation. We'll have to see how many of these changes actually stick. But the Mount Mitchell down in Black Mountain, North Carolina, that's a 40-mile race, and that was one of my favorite races. Right outside Asheville, beautiful trails, really tough race, but really runnable also. And another one where, a lot of great runners have taken shots at that one. That would, if you were willing to go for a shorter qualifier, that's at the end of February. That would, fit the time frame, certainly. I mean, Hellgate would be really good if you were willing to widen the window a little bit, to Hellgate's like early to mid-December. So if it's about a month before the first golden ticket race is currently at Bandera. That's a really well-established race. Another one that I haven't run, but I've heard fantastic things about, and, tough but runnable trails, that would be really cool. If you wanted to go outside the window, then you bring in like, Vermont, you bring in Twisted Branch would be a really cool one. There's a couple others that you could think of. JFK, obviously, if you wanted to have a 50-mile in November. It'd be interesting if they played with the qualifying or the golden ticket window and included some late fall races.
So I have this idea that we do Eastern states and Western states.
Okay.
And then there's like a mid states. So like those two, and then there's actually the Super Bowl. And like the top 10 of Eastern states and Western states race in the middle. And then we can have like all the the golden tickets on the East Coast for the Eastern states, golden tickets on the West Coast for Western states. And then we meet in the middle, because that just sounds like the epic thing. And I would totally get behind that.
It would be awesome. Here's I'm gonna push back on this a little bit and tell you why I think it's a great idea. Here's why it's gonna have trouble getting traction. One is, and this is the main problem, is Western states is so ingrained in the culture and just has so much importance historically that it's going to be really hard for any race, even one that would be like affiliated in some way with it. It's just, you're never going to have the history or the prestige that's going to match it. And it's going to be hard for them to, it's going to be hard for anything to surpass it, even if, the board was somehow to get behind that. The second problem, the only other problem that I could come up with is, where are you going to do it? Like, when you say in the middle, are we meeting in like Colorado or are we meeting in like Nebraska? Because if it's Nebraska, nobody's going. I mean, God bless Casey and everybody else, but nobody wants to run the world championship or the American championship of the 100-mile, in Omaha or anything like that.
What about Texas? That's in the middle.
Yeah. That'd be fine. Texas, if you call that the middle, that's fine. There's this how do I want to phrase it? I think a lot of kind of trail runners, especially out west, have this kind of contempt for flat, non-mountainous races. I shouldn't just say out west, because that happens in the east a lot too. So I personally, coming from a running and or from a road and a track background, I love hills and I love mountains, but I like flatter, runnable races also. Like Rocky is fantastic. I love that race. And that's, it's got enough variety in it to make it interesting, but it's not like a big vert race. It's not like, big boulders or stuff that we see on the East Coast. It's much more, it's like whatever. But so you and I, with our backgrounds, we love that sort of stuff. But I mean, you're not going to get a lot of buy-in from like the top athletes to run like a flat 100 in Texas.
True. Well, we all need to make sacrifices, and
I think, people have toyed around with the idea of like, a series with a culminating championship and that sort of thing. And I think, like in Eastern states, Western states, and then like a 100-mile championship is a great idea. It's gained some traction. I mean, North Face did a great job and had like, a series of 50 milers. And then, the North Face championship grew into like a real season ending, championship type race where, the fields at that race were as loaded as anything else over the course of the year. I mean, nationally and internationally. So, there's an appetite for it if you get the right sponsor and the right, distance and the right location and everything else. It's a balancing act.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see. I just like your ultra running fantasy team. I just like, throwing out these interesting ideas to see like what would stick. Yeah. Well, Jay, thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. This is a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me, Ellie.
And I look forward to more of your Coach's Corner on the Trails Collective. That was pretty great. I was so excited when I saw that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, Ian had thrown that out there. So, we'll try and do something like that every once in a while if I have something interesting.
Yeah, it's great. So to close out, why don't you just tell people where they can find you and say hello online?
Sure. So I'm at Gunksrunner, GUNKSRUNNER, on Instagram and Twitter, although I'm never really on Twitter. But if you go to my website, which is gunksrunner.com, like you said, thank you. There's information on my coaching and exercise physiology testing, which I offer through a lab here. Once everything reopens, hopefully we'll get that back underway. And also my blog and the Pain Cave podcast, like you said. You can download Pain Cave on Spotify and iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher and everywhere else. Yeah. And and I should also mention I'm working with a new coaching service that I was coaching with the Lifetime Fitness group for a while, and one of the head coaches for Lifetime Fitness, who works with me and the other Leadville-based coaches, has just started a new service called Boundless Coaching. So if people want to check that out, it's at Boundless, BOUNDLESS 10200, 10200, boundless10200.com. And 10200 is referring to the altitude of Leadville, 10,200 feet. So that's got all the coaching information there too, and people can sign up for coaching and learn more about what we do.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jay.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ellie.